Hello and welcome to What the Tech from Boast AI, where we talk with some of the brilliant minds behind new and exciting tech initiatives to learn what it takes to tackle technological uncertainty and eventually change the world. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome onto the show Developa founder Beth Nevins. Developa is a people and talent consultancy with deep expertise and experience operating in and supporting startups backed by Tiger Global, Sequoia, Target Global, Balderton, and Atomico. As experts in people and talent, Beth and her team work as advisors, coaches, and consultants to help startups accelerate and realize their vision. Outside of Developa, Beth has extensive experience at tech-driven startups, helping steer people ops and strategy at businesses from seed stage to commercial growth, international expansion, and following investment rounds. I'm excited to pick Beth's brain on what skills and strategies founders can leverage as they navigate the various stages of startup life and eventually march towards the CEO mantle, how teams should build their C-suite in the first place, and common challenges facing startups when it comes to people and talent in 2024. So, without further ado, welcome to the show, Beth.
Thanks, Paul.
I am so happy to have you. How do you get into the startup space? What sparked your entrepreneurial spirit? And how did we get here to where we're at today with Developa?
Well, you gave a great intro, so I don't know what more to add. At university, I randomly studied theology. I've always been very interested in things very different to myself. I specialized in Islam, actually, at university. And what I was really fascinated about religion in particular and spirituality is that belief in the things that many people may not be able to see. And vision, there's a vision there that some of these, prophets and so forth had. So I was really, really fascinated for some reason in that historically. I don't know whether that's played into then other aspects of, I wouldn't say founders are the same, but they do start off with seeing the world right differently and a vision that other people go on that journey with them. So it's quite interesting how that's transpired in my life. But after university, I fell into recruitment, as many people claim if they have been a recruiter. And what was unique about that recruitment company was they specialized in startup recruitment. So right from the beginning, very early on, I was working with co-founders and founding teams, understanding their business model, their vision, their values, and predominantly hiring across product and engineering and that full software development lifecycle. And I loved it. And then eventually I moved from being an agent into more internal companies. And it was while I was internal talent head that I got headhunted to join my first startup in the founding team. So I think we were less than 10 people at the time. Yeah, this is true seed, like just an idea. I met the founder. He was amazing. And then months later when I joined, I realized his age and I was like, oh my God, this person is so young, because I just had worked with more experienced founders historically. And that was just amazing. Just goes to show, anything's possible. There's no barriers. And that team was unbelievable. And it was a deep tech company. And organically, then I broadened my skill set from talent right the way through into what we call people, which historically others may understand as more HR, but we call it more people these days. And that was fantastic. Second startup, then I did that all over again for my sins. I worked internally in a fintech, which was very much multicultural, very diverse, very international by default, and more regulated than the deep tech business I'd been in previously. So very different business and operating model required. And then I got to a point in my career, now 15 years down the line, I wanted to help more founders in a more portfolio career. And that is our mission really, is we help founders succeed. We want founders to win. We are a massive believer in entrepreneurship, massively part of that myself. And we have 3 services now, as you sort of teed me up to explain where we focus on. One, of course, is candidates. What you put in is most of the problem, half of the time. So we really raise that bar. That's what we're known for, pushing the founders to think higher and bigger and better in terms of the teams and hiring people better than you. So we do that on a retained basis. We then also, as the startup matures into more of that scaling product market fit stage, we work on more people related projects. So that's around the experience that people in the company will go through. So that's things like onboarding, leveling and progression frameworks that people need for retention. Performance is a big one, a hot topic right now. And of course, compensation and reward, which is quite analytical and quite commercial in how you think about that. So we bring that lens in from a strategic perspective. And then, of course, coaching, although we can get into that a bit further down the line, because that can mean very different things to different people. But we do leadership coaching. But more specifically for founders, we've gone more narrow over the coming weeks and months, where we now focus a lot more on a specific program for them on hiring leaders and then leading those leaders and that leadership team consequently. So a bit more narrower focus on where we sit right now. And that's my story and that's us.
Oh, that is an amazing story. I wasn't expecting the theology study to kick it all off, but I do honestly think that makes sense. At the core, a lot of religion is based around community and building faith in a mission and building faith in the people who are leading that mission. I think it's dangerous to call them startup leaders, religious leaders in their own right, but I do see a one-to-one there and how that can be applicable in terms of building your credibility around the mission and building that excitement and community around it. I think that is totally one-to-one and awesome. Just perspective to bring to the whole startup scene. And then I also love how you said fell into recruitment. I absolutely know people who describe it that way. It's not something people necessarily wake up thinking, hey, I want to be a career in sourcing talent or things like that. But you find your way there, and sometimes unexpected things can come from that. It gives you exposure to different companies. And in your case, it sounds like some really exciting startup missions too. And again, I love that you said we want founders to win. That is so simpatico with what we're doing over here at Boast. It's R&D tax credits, it is Shred, but it's really about helping founders do more without overextending themselves, making sure that they're maximizing their access to non-dilutive capital, and also making sure that their teams are actually working as efficiently as possible, which I think is really, really important because, as you know, working in the people and talent world, I want to dive into the differentiators there too.
Yeah.
It is critical that you're not having people working on projects that are tangential to what their strengths, to what they should really be focusing on. So part of what we do here at Boast, again, is making sure that developer teams aren't being bogged down with writing R&D tax credit claims. They should be focused on driving their innovation. And again, working within those frameworks that it sounds like Developa is aces at helping teams develop. So that's my little takeaway from your rundown, because I thought there were a lot of really interesting key points there. But let's go back into Developa a little bit and talk a little bit about what differentiates you from other resources, I guess, for startups in the community. I know we did touch on it a little bit, but specifically those hiring frameworks and those hiring searches and building a C-suite. I know this comes up a lot on our show. We have founders on who are very early stage. We also have mid-market and success stories. Nothing ever goes as planned. And how do you set your best plans and stick to them when you're building that leadership team? And how can Developa, I guess, help teams get there? My loaded question for you.
Yeah, so there's loads in there to unpack.
Absolutely.
I'll start on the differentiator or why, but I also want to be sensitive to everyone has a place in their services and what value they bring. But where are we unique? Okay, so I've been there. So I've done it. So I've been uniquely on the inside, which is the value add on the outside. And the reason I say that was when I was on the outside, I was doing a great job at pattern matching and bringing people in. Fantastic. But you have so much more context and nuance once you've been inside that you're just not privy to, and understanding that model so deeply. And I can get things so much quicker now in terms of how to position that company is important. We talk about stage fit all the time and so forth, but because I've done seed and all these different rounds, for example, when you're selling a seed company, you've only got your words. So you have to make sure you've got someone who is an amazing communicator on your behalf, that is fantastic at sales. And in a way now that's so competitive for talent, they have to be the most amazing wordsmith, but also the most human to get this talent out, because we're in a lost connection world now where people are very transactional, have got loads of KPIs and have, can get the numbers up and so forth. But what candidates want is relationships and part of that journey. And I even have candidates come back to me and say, like, are you like external? Do you work for yourself? Or I swear I have the impression you're in the founding team, and that's because I get so bought in to the founders that I represent and I get the model. I really believe in it. I think that's very important. I think the stats speak to themselves in terms of the track record. Like, I'm on an account now, 100% offer and acceptance rate. That's them and us together as a team. But part of that in terms of the coaching element, which you don't get if you have an external agent, is not just the consulting of like, is this actually the right role? I will hear everything going on in the model. I will hear everything on the goals. I will then have the insight from being internal to challenge. This is the right level. This is the right thing that you just don't have as an agent. Because when you're an agent and you've not been an operator, you're just taking the requirement. You're taking their word for it. There's no coaching involved. So that's you have to be experienced if you're going to just take an external source that hasn't been an operator in that shoes. If you want the challenge and you want the consulting that comes with that, with the value add, then that's the beauty of having someone like me that's done that and worn the people hat, not just the talent hat. And that's when you become an amazing recruiter, if you can be quite full stack in that sense, to be honest. So then when we go through the coaching journey with first time founders, what they benefit with me is, not just the bar we set. So ironically, I was speaking to founders this week and we were talking about VC benchmarks and valuations. That's their views, not mine. So when I go in with founders, my job often is to prop them up and say, you're lowballing on the talent that we could get. Why can't we get so-and-so down the road? Why are you limiting yourselves? This is first principles thinking to get the best talent we want. And the best talent is what we can get that we believe is the best in our bar for the money that we currently have in this stage in time. And I want to look back when we've made that hire as a team and go, was that really the best we had? Did we do everything to get the best person with that pot we've got? Not just leave it to our little advert on the career site and hope for the best. Are we hunting and getting the best? And that's the thing, because what I drum into founders is how you get out the blocks is the most important bit, is the start. So we want to give ourselves the best start possible. And that comes with that founding team. And that's why we work together on the talent bar, and then training them on the candidate experience and what that really means and how that's important is where they really start leveling themselves up as a recruiter. So even a VC asked me last week, true story, like, what's a pre-close? Like, what do you even mean by that? So I was teaching the VC, not just the founders, the general partners in the venture capital firm, like what are pre-closes? And just for the audience, I'll just explain. So when we're recruiting, we do the classic ABC, which means always be closing.
Oh, yeah.
And and if you're in sales, you know this, but founders need to be great salespeople. So we train this to them as well. If we're sort of early on, we will always look at the motivations and the risk early on. And the reason we do that, and we're trained to do that, is you can't close if you haven't used that first window when the guard is down on what their motivations are. So that's where we're going, why they've left things, are there push and pull factors one way or the other in their lives? And what does life look like for them in 2, 3, 5 years' time? So we can see where we fit in facilitating that driver for the candidate. Now, as you go through that process and you're buying at the same time, are they right for this? And you're also selling. Midway through that process, you'll do sort of your temperature check with the candidate, and you ask them more exploratory questions. So, what are your thoughts on this? If they have multiple interviews, how do we compare against the others? These are open-ended questions to allow the candidate to speak freely that you can listen to and then make some judgments. Now, as you complete the process, you then do a pre-close conversation before you make an offer. And this is very important to have active listening skills that I train the founders on how we go about this. So some things we might say here is, and we're talking more about the closer, the actual offer itself. So, salary aside, out of these companies, where do we sit? If you could rank all the companies you've got, where do we sit now? Because that's the first question you want. Salary aside, if we give you an offer today, what would you say? Yes or no? We ask them, if you had an offer today, what would you say? Because if they say, I'm going to think about it, it's not a yes. If they go, I'll say yes, it's a yes. So it's all these things in terms of building our confidence and fluency that we coach the founders on this journey together from working with us. And we have the skills to do that, of course, that really levels them up for foundations of success in the future. And this is the one thing I think, I'm really mindful of in terms of excellence. And I see this, we're in an age now of accelerated careers and we've got to get the best thing and all this. But if you haven't mastered things, you never really get there. And this is a long lesson in my career. People go to me, one or two things about recruitment. When I had my first job, this is true, as an agent, lots of other companies were letting them loose, the recruiters, and they were going off doing business development and making more money than our company. And that was really frustrating me. I was looking outside and going, why can't we go and win business? Our company kept us resourcing and delivering more for the top billers for quite some extended time. And the reason they held us back on that was because we mastered the basics. And that takes some time. And that, I'll be honest, I've learned very few things more so in talent in those early years because the foundations at that level of mastery. And it's as simple as that when it comes to talent. And that's the thing I try and explain to founders.
Absolutely. Mastering the basics, that's the key to excellence. We spoke about a lot here, but one thing I want to pull back to that was at the beginning, and I think shown throughout your explanation, was you've been there and you have done it. And I think having that experience in the field is critical. Going to bring it back to the simpatico between our mission and Boast, to be honest, because we're a team of technologists. What they like is that we have built these solutions. We have built SaaS products before. We're building our SaaS product right now. And while it's the people at our core who are passionate about helping founders win, we understand and speak the language because we have been in the field, in the nitty gritty. We're elbow to elbow with the founders that we want to support. And I think that is awesome because you can have a little bit of skill in a million different places, but if you don't master those basics and you don't master those foundations, like you were saying, I think you're never going to achieve that excellence. And it's our truth, but you really have to dig into it. Another thing you mentioned too was being an amazing communicator. Going to shout out our founders, Lloyd and Alex. I think that they are the perfect example of kind of the complementary skill sets. Lloyd is a master communicator. He built the Traction team. He built the Traction podcast and community. It's been a huge success. Whereas Alex, again, he complemented and picked up where Lloyd really necessarily didn't have the experience. But together they built a great company. And again, we're helping founders and we're helping entrepreneurs just like you are today, Beth. Now I want to get into something a little specific. We talked about how those founders and how those people can build the teams around them. But what are some of the skills a founder should have as they kind of graduate towards officially becoming that CEO? Of course, they've always had that executive mantle from the start, but what are some of the skills that they should really hone as the company matures?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be fluid with early stage and I'll say later stage for this, but early stage, then if you are just a founder starting off, the foundational skills, as you've mentioned, is of course like setting the vision, communication. Someone in the founding team needs to be good at selling.
Absolutely.
Someone needs to be good at selling. Someone needs to be good at hiring, or at least have some sort of an HR, or potential for that. And also the next thing is being hands-on enough. Like when I'm looking at a founder, if they're super early on, if I can tell they're quite hands-off and more the ideas person, that's a problem. So I'd like to think, if I look at all the lovely founders I work with, part of the thing Developa's been successful is we pick good founders to work with. So, I think that's also important. But at this point, the founder is probably touching everything functionally. They're getting a contract out, they're hiring, they're selling, they're probably paying people, they're writing their own LinkedIn post. So they've kind of done everything. So when you get to a CEO bit, the fundamental difference is early on a founder is understanding the business model, the domain they're in, and the customer. That's kind of the main focus at that point. But once you're sort of scaling product market fit, the founder CEO is now working on understanding themselves. So what I mean by that is the big mindset shift then is understanding what my role is now within all of this. What is my actual strength and my, energy? So then the co-founders between them can understand exactly what role titles and areas they're going to double down on, and then where the gaps are in their leadership team. I think it was Bending Spoons. They're in Italy. They're a double unicorn or something, right? And Luca on there this is the CEO, was saying like there was 3 of them, or maybe even 4. But anyways, a lot of co-founders there. And he was saying, we had this whole like big debate of who should even be the CEO, and none of us wanted to be it. And I think Luca ended up doing it. But I think that's my point. Like you actually have to have a conversation around, sometimes it's very clear as day who's the CTO, but actually like who is the better on like sales? Who might be the better product if there's 2 or 3 of you? Maybe if you're a solo founder, that changes the game dramatically quite early on and how you're thinking about this. And this becomes a more pressing problem in terms of looking at that strength around you and so forth. So I think that becomes important. And it goes back, the next transitional like skill you're needing is to lead those leaders. If you kind of haven't got mastered recruitment, this is where this starts to become a bit of a problem. So the next bit is the leadership team. So it's the governance, it's the onboarding, it's the hiring, and of course it's the performance management of them, which as a whole, as a whole topic in itself. And then the new skill, I think, which comes with any sort of VP or whatever level plus is the stakeholder management. And that's, they've now got not just, a few angels or whatever investors and their founding team. There is like, a load of different employees in different functions. There's investors, quite rightly, as you mentioned, Paul, there's community, not just customers, and their board. So there's all that to think about in terms of juggling then how you communicate, how you start, engaging with them, who to update, who to inform, and so forth, who to leverage as your champions. There's all sorts of different strategies to work out that fundamental skill set. And then I'd say like key decision making. So I think when you're making everything at every task level as a founder, Now, the most important thing as a CEO is to work out like any week, any quarter, any year, like what are the 2-3 things at any given time that you know to laser focus on that will move the dial, the business to move forward. Everything else can burn or be delegated basically, or is just clearly not important if you know those 2 things. And even when I've coached C-levels in the executive or leading teams, I used to get leaders coming to me with all these things going on and on as a sounding board. And I used to just stop them in their chats and say, just tell me 2 things. And they always know, they can always answer that, but you have to ask them that. So it's like, what are the 2 things that we're focusing on? And then, of course, I think culture becomes a real thing. Of course, it is always from the start, but being a bit more intentional with that. And my lessons over the years is when I had my first people leader role, I was like, great, I'm the hero, I'm the owner of culture. This is all me, me, me. I'm going to do this and put all these ideas. And as I got older and more experienced, I realized actually, no, my role on culture is to work more on the founder to take ownership of that and be more intentional as a CEO, because ultimately they are accountable for that. So if the founder's not really having the space and values that as their ownership, a part of their role, that's quite difficult, I think, for the partnership and for the company long term. It's not really something you can delegate. So that's something very important. And then the last thing is like scaling communication. So my views on this is like, you have to be direct. You have to have clarity and consistency. I'm less concerned around this like obsessive transparency that other people talk about. I think clarity is more important of like, what do you actually mean? Transparency can mean different things to different people. I do think that's important. And there's a leveling framework. I would look at transparency at different levels in your business that's required to perform. And I frame that discussion that way. But clarity is something, keep refining that, and consistency are the things I really focus more on. I think while they need to value infrastructure and all that standardization, and again, they will be more operational as they grow, I'm less concerned on like how much they need to know the whole dots in the flywheel, as long as that's delegated and they value it and can support that. Because the biggest challenge I find with founders, even if they're mechanical or from an engineering background, is getting their head around the whole systems of like how everything talks as far as internal infrastructure goes. So they can understand a lot of concepts, but it is that infrastructure piece I find that they do find the most difficult. So in my opinion, I just say, look, that's the trust bit. You have to believe in it, but let someone else build that for you. You focus on the leadership team and more of the people aspects then instead than the nuts and bolts of how everything's going to hang together. You don't need to know all the answers. And that's the liberating thing.
Yeah. And you don't want to get bogged down in stuff that's just going to get you away from, again, what you should be focused on. I'm glad that you kind of broke down. I've worked at several different startups, and we always hear transparency, performance, trust. I think clarity is really what you want to zero in on. And so I love that you brought that up, and the infrastructure piece too. I do like, though, that you said the founder needs to take ownership of the culture at some point too. And that needs to be echoed when they become the CEO. To simplify it maybe a little too much, it's leading from the front. I think that that's critical. I actually feel like you must have been in conversation with our new CEO, Ahmad, at some point, just based on how he's been executing since then. Because again, he has a background in customer success, and that was what we needed from our CEO. Because again, we are a team of technologists. We know everything about building the tech. We're also a team of angels in our own way. So many of our BD teams are investors in different companies. So I mean, it's a real hodgepodge in a good way. And I think by having somebody with that experience of customer success, he brings up the complementary skill set, but he also is really leading on that culture front. He's trying to really establish a culture, and he's trying to make sure, hey, we have these coffee chats once a week with him specifically and members of the SLT, helping them even almost become founders of their own individual organizations within Boast. So I've seen that work firsthand. I love that that's the mission that you guys are really pushing on over at Developa. Now, knowing that we're actually at time, I'd love to know what's in store for the rest of 2024. Is there anything exciting that you're looking forward to at Developa? Any events you might be going to, or just goals for the rest of the year?
I think the step change, to be very frank, in the last 6 months was really being more ruthless and specific on the founders that we wanted to select and work with, to be very honest. So I think that's been like very important part of our brand, that we want to work with high class founders in the first place. So our sourcing and selection now has tightened in the last few months. I think for me, the thing that we're doubling down on is this new talent program for founders that we're really focusing a lot more on, and we'll be releasing that more at scale later this year. So that's the area that I add a lot of value in day to day. So I've been codifying that as we go and refining that for launch. So on larger scale. So yeah, that's to come.
I love it. Beth, this is all very exciting. And again, I'm so happy that you could join us. I think this is some very valuable takeaways for a lot of the founders in our audience. And I can't wait to get this interview out there so that people can start cheerleading it too. But thank you so much, Beth Nevins. Everybody, I will have the contact information in our show notes, but this was fantastic.
Thank you. Do you think the fact that your founder has a customer success background, do you think that then naturally permeates some more like that customer obsession with the culture? Because that's the thing I found in deep tech companies. They're so obsessed on the product and the technology and not enough on the customer. And it's interesting to see when someone's from the other side of the background, how that translates into the culture.
Yeah, that's what I'm experiencing. Because again, I've been on a few other things too. Like I'm more or less our marketing team. I report to a CRO. I don't report to a CMO or a VP of marketing. Organization has changed significantly, but we're making the necessary changes. And I think that's influenced by our board, to be honest. But we had a new CEO join this year. We had our head of our board take over for a little bit. She used to work at Galvanize and Diligent. She's amazing. She's steered unicorns. And Laurie identified where our problems were. And again, we had a culture issue. And we had a customer success issue. We had a customer just nurturing issue. We could get in the nitty gritty talking about the cool tech we do. We could talk all day about working with the IRS or the CRA, but how are we communicating the true value to our customers? How are we even making our platform attractive to customers because we're not communicating that value? So we needed a CEO to make sure that got permeated throughout the organization. And I mean, we've had growing pains, of course. I've stayed along for the ride and I'm more excited than I am than when I joined a year and a half ago. And I think we're on a good pace because we're focused on those right things. So it's a little bit about what's going on over here at Boast, at least.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much for saying yes. Well, I wish you loads of success and good luck, basically.